The dust swirled in angry spirals as Katherine Vance clutched her father's pocket watch, the only family heirloom she had left in the world. 10 minutes, the wagon master had shouted before cracking his whip. 10 minutes and we're moving on with or without you. Those 10 minutes had passed nearly an hour ago, and the last wagon had disappeared over the horizon, leaving nothing but wheel ruts in the hard-packed earth of the Wyoming Territory. 1869. Katherine had only meant to retrieve her father's journal from the riverbank, where she'd been sketching earlier that morning. She never imagined the wagon train would actually leave her behind a 22-year-old woman alone in the wilderness, miles from the nearest settlement. Her family wasn't even aboard to notice her absence. Typhoid had claimed her parents and younger brother 3 weeks earlier outside of Cheyenne. The sun beat down mercilessly as Katherine took inventory of her meager possessions. The clothes on her back, her father's watch and journal, a small knife in her boot, and a canteen that was already half empty. The wagon train was headed toward Wallace, Wyoming, a settlement she knew was at least 4 days' travel ahead. On foot, in this terrain, she might as well try to walk to the moon. A distant cry of a hawk made her jump. The vastness of the prairie suddenly felt suffocating. Katherine knew she needed to move, to find shelter before nightfall when predators would emerge. She squinted at the horizon where the wagons had disappeared, took a deep breath, and began walking. By dusk, Katherine's lips were cracked and her feet throbbed inside her impractical town boots. The shadows lengthened across the prairie, transforming familiar shapes into menacing silhouettes. She found a small outcropping of rocks that offered minimal protection and huddled against them, clutching her knife as the first stars appeared. Sleep came in fitful bursts, interrupted by every rustle of grass and distant howl. When dawn finally broke, Katherine rose stiffly, rationing a small sip of water before continuing her journey. Her stomach growled painfully, reminding her that her last meal had been breakfast the previous day. By midday, the sun was merciless. Katherine stumbled, her vision blurring as dehydration took its toll. She had been following the wagon tracks, but they were becoming less distinct, erased by the wind and her own confusion. Was she still on the right path? Would anyone even notice she was missing? As she crested a small rise, her foot caught on a rock, sending her tumbling down the gentle slope. Pain shot through her ankle and she bit back a cry. Dragging herself to a seated position, Katherine examined her ankle, swollen and tender, though not broken. Tears welled in her eyes as the reality of her situation crashed over her. She would die out here, alone and forgotten. The sound came so faintly at first that Katherine thought she was hallucinating the distant rhythm of hoofbeats. She strained to listen, afraid to hope. The sound grew louder, more distinct. Someone was coming. Katherine struggled to her feet, ignoring the pain in her ankle as she waved frantically. "Help, over here!" Her voice was hoarse, barely carrying on the wind. The rider appeared over the rise, a tall figure astride a chestnut stallion. As he drew closer, Katherine could make out a dust-covered hat pulled low over his eyes, a weathered denim jacket, and the glint of a sheriff's badge. The horse slowed to a stop a few feet from where Katherine stood swaying. The man dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots hitting the ground with a soft thud. When he pushed back his hat, Katherine found herself looking into the most striking green eyes she'd ever seen. "Miss Vance." His voice was deep, tinged with concern. "Katherine Vance." Katherine nodded, too shocked to speak. "How did he know her name?" "Gabriel Vaughn," he said, touching the brim of his hat. "Deputy from Wallace. Rode out as soon as they realized you were missing." He glanced at her injured ankle. "You're hurt." "It's nothing," Katherine managed, though she couldn't hide her wince when she tried to put weight on it. Gabriel frowned. That wagon master's got a lot to answer for, leaving you behind. He reached for his canteen. Here, drink this slowly. Katherine accepted the canteen with trembling hands, taking careful sips of the cool water. Thank you, she whispered. I thought. She couldn't finish the sentence. Thought they'd forgotten about you. Gabriel's expression hardened. Nearly did. If Widow Cooper hadn't been asking after you when they pulled into Wallace last night, they might not have noticed at all. Relief flooded through Katherine. Martha Cooper had been kind to her after her parents died, offering what comfort she could despite being a near stranger herself. Can you ride? Gabriel asked, eyeing her ankle again. Katherine nodded, straightening her shoulders. I can manage. Gabriel's lips curved in the ghost of a smile. Thought you might say that. He moved to his horse, adjusting the stirrups. We'll make camp at the creek about 2 hours from here. Should reach Wallace by tomorrow afternoon. As he helped Katherine onto the horse, his hands were gentle but sure. She settled into the saddle, and Gabriel mounted behind her, reaching around to take the reins. Katherine stiffened at the unfamiliar proximity, but as they began to move, the rhythm of the horse and the solid presence at her back brought unexpected comfort. Why did you come back for me? She asked after they had ridden in silence for nearly an hour. You don't even know me. Gabriel was quiet for so long that Katherine thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low near her ear. Nobody deserves to be left behind. Something in the way he said it made Katherine think he wasn't just talking about her situation. She didn't press further, content for the moment to simply be safe, to be found. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, Gabriel guided the horse to a small creek lined with cottonwood trees. He dismounted first, then reached up to help Katherine down. The moment her weight landed on her injured ankle, she gasped in pain, stumbling against his chest. His arms steadied her, strong and secure. Easy now, he murmured, concern etching his features. Up close, Katherine could see the fine lines around his eyes that suggested he was older than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 or so, and the faint scar that ran along his jawline. His face was tanned and weathered from years under the western sun, but there was a gentleness to his expression that belied his rugged appearance. I'll help you to that fallen log, Gabriel said, nodding toward a spot by the creek. Then I'll set up camp. Katherine allowed him to support her weight as they moved to the log. She sat gratefully, stretching her injured leg before her. Gabriel worked efficiently, unsaddling his horse and setting up a small fire. From his saddlebags, he produced jerky, hardtack, and coffee. As the coffee began to boil in a small pot over the fire, he knelt before Katherine. May I? He asked, gesturing to her ankle. Katherine nodded hesitantly. Gabriel removed her boot with careful movements, his touch clinical as he examined the swelling. Not broken, he confirmed. But a bad sprain. We'll soak it in the creek. The cold water will help with the swelling. Katherine was acutely aware of his hands on her skin as he helped her to the creek's edge. The water was shockingly cold against her heated skin, but the relief was immediate. How did you become a deputy? She asked, partly out of curiosity and partly to distract herself from the intimacy of the moment. Gabriel settled beside her, keeping a respectable distance. Fell into it, I suppose. Came west after the war, spent 4 years fighting for the Union. Didn't much care for going back east afterward. You fought in the war. Katherine studied him with newfound respect. The Civil War had ended just 4 years ago, leaving the nation still healing from its deep wounds. Gabriel nodded, his expression unreadable. Most men my age did. He paused. Lost my brother at Antietam. I'm sorry, Katherine said softly. Gabriel shrugged, but his eyes reflected an old pain. What about you? What brings you west on a wagon train without family? Katherine stared at the rippling water around her ankle. My father was a doctor in Philadelphia. When my mother died 2 years ago, he got it in his head that we needed a fresh start. He had a cousin in Oregon who wrote about opportunities for medical men. She swallowed the lump in her throat. We never made it that far. Typhoid took my father, my brother James, and any plans for the future I might have had. I'm sorry, Gabriel echoed her earlier words, his voice sincere. Katherine forced a smile. As you said, most people have lost someone. They ate a simple meal as darkness fell, the fire casting dancing shadows across their faces. Katherine found herself studying Gabriel when he wasn't looking the way his hands moved with purpose, the thoughtful set of his mouth, the occasional faraway look in his eyes. "How far is Wallace from here?" she asked as he poured her a cup of coffee. "About 15 miles. It's not much, a few dozen buildings, a church, a school, but it's growing." Gabriel passed her the tin cup. "The railroad's coming through next year. That'll change everything." Katherine wrapped her fingers around the warm cup. "What will I do there? I don't know anyone except Widow Cooper." Gabriel regarded her over the flames. "Wallace needs a school teacher. Last one left to get married 6 months ago. Been trying to convince someone from back east to come out, but no takers yet." "I'm not a trained teacher," Katherine admitted. "Can you read, write, do sums?" When she nodded, Gabriel shrugged. "That's more education than most folks around here have." Town council would likely be grateful for anyone willing to take on the children. The idea took root in Katherine's mind. She had helped tutor her brother and had always enjoyed learning herself. Perhaps this was the opportunity she needed, a way to support herself and build a new life. "You should rest," Gabriel said, interrupting her thoughts. "Tomorrow will be a long day." He offered her his bedroll despite her protests and settled himself on the opposite side of the fire with his saddle as a pillow. Katherine lay awake for a long time, listening to the night sounds and watching the stars wheel overhead. For the first time since losing her family, she felt a flicker of hope for the future. Morning came with the soft murmur of the creek and birdsong. Katherine opened her eyes to find Gabriel already awake, tending to his horse. He had a quiet way about him, economical in movement and speech, yet there was nothing cold in his manner. "How's the ankle?" he asked when he noticed her stirring. Katherine rotated it carefully. "Better, I think. Still sore, but the swelling has gone down." They breakfasted on the remaining hardtack and coffee before Gabriel helped her onto his horse. This time, she was less self-conscious about his proximity as they rode, even finding herself leaning slightly into his solid chest when fatigue washed over her. As they traveled, Gabriel pointed out landmarks and shared bits of local knowledge. He had been in the Wyoming Territory for 3 years, he told her, and had seen it change from wild frontier to the beginnings of civilization. The land was harsh but beautiful in its vastness. "There," Gabriel said as they crested a hill around midday. "Wallace." Katherine followed his gesture to see a small collection of buildings nestled in a valley below. It wasn't much to look at: wooden structures lined along a main street, a white church steeple rising above the other buildings, scattered homesteads in the distance. But after days on the wagon train and her ordeal alone on the prairie, it looked like paradise. As they approached the town, people emerged from buildings to watch their arrival. Katherine felt self-conscious about her disheveled appearance and the fact that she was sharing a horse with the deputy. In Philadelphia, such a situation would have caused a scandal. Gabriel seemed to sense her discomfort. "Folks here are practical," he said quietly. "They understand survival trumps propriety in the West." They stopped outside a neat whitewashed building with a sign that read Cooper's Boarding House. A plump woman with gray-streaked hair hurried down the steps, her face lighting with relief when she saw Katherine. "Thank the Lord," Martha Cooper exclaimed. "When they came without you, I feared the worst." She turned to Gabriel with clear admiration. "You found her, Deputy Vaughn." "I knew you would." Gabriel dismounted and helped Katherine down, supporting her weight as he explained about her ankle. Martha immediately took charge, ushering Katherine inside with promises of a hot bath, clean clothes, and a proper meal. Katherine glanced back at Gabriel before entering the boarding house. "Thank you," she said, the words entirely inadequate for what she felt. "I owe you my life." Gabriel touched the brim of his hat, his green eyes meeting hers. "Get some rest, Miss Vance. I'll check on you tomorrow." The next week passed in a blur of activity. Martha Cooper proved to be a godsend, providing Katherine with not only room and board but also introducing her to the townsfolk of Wallace. Word of Katherine's ordeal spread quickly, garnering sympathy and offers of assistance. When Martha mentioned Katherine's interest in the teaching position, the town council arranged to meet with her immediately. The school was a modest one-room building on the edge of town, currently sitting empty and forlorn. The council, consisting of the mayor, the local minister, and two prominent businessmen, seemed more interested in Katherine's willingness to take the position than her actual qualifications. "Term starts in 3 weeks," Mayor Hanson explained. 28 children, ages 6 to 15. Salary's not much, but includes lodging in the rooms above the schoolhouse and meals at the hotel during the week. Katherine accepted on the spot. It was more than she could have hoped for independence and purpose in one neat package. She saw Gabriel only in passing during those first days. He would tip his hat when they encountered each other on the street, inquire about her ankle, which was healing nicely, but never lingered long. Katherine told herself she wasn't disappointed by his distance. 10 days after her arrival in Wallace, Katherine was organizing books in the schoolhouse when she heard footsteps on the wooden floor. She turned to find Gabriel standing in the doorway, holding his hat in his hands. "Deputy Vaughn," she said, surprised by how pleased she was to see him. "Miss Vance." He stepped inside, glancing around at the room. "Place looks better already." Katherine smiled, brushing dust from her hands. It just needed some attention. She had spent days cleaning, arranging desks, and cataloging the meager supply of books. Gabriel nodded, then seemed to hesitate before speaking again. "I came to ask if you might like to join me for supper at the hotel tonight, to celebrate your new position." The invitation caught Katherine off guard. She felt a flutter of something in her chest, anticipation, nervousness. "I would like that," she replied. 7 o'clock. 7 it is." Gabriel nodded again, replaced his hat, and left as quietly as he had arrived, leaving Katherine to wonder if she had imagined the slight smile that crossed his face. That evening, Katherine dressed with particular care in one of the 2 dresses. Martha had helped her acquire a modest blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes. She pinned her dark hair up in a simple style, wishing fleetingly for the vanity table and cosmetics she had left behind in Philadelphia. The hotel dining room was the closest thing Wallace had to fine dining, with actual tablecloths and a menu that changed daily based on what supplies were available. When Katherine arrived, she spotted Gabriel immediately, standing as she approached their table. Up close, she realized he had made an effort. As well, his usually dusty jacket had been brushed clean, his shirt was freshly pressed, and his dark hair was neatly combed. The effect was striking. "You look lovely," he said as he held her chair. Katherine felt a blush rise to her cheeks. "Thank you." "You're looking rather dapper yourself, Deputy." "Gabriel," he corrected gently. "Off duty, I'm just Gabriel." The meal was simple but well-prepared: venison steak, potatoes, and early summer vegetables. As they ate, conversation flowed more easily than Katherine had expected. Gabriel spoke of his childhood in Ohio, his time at war, and his journey west. Katherine shared stories of Philadelphia society, her father's medical practice, and her brother's mischievous streak. "I never thought I'd end up in a place like Wallace," Katherine admitted as they lingered over coffee. "My father had such grand plans for Oregon, a new medical practice, perhaps even a small hospital eventually." "Life has a way of taking unexpected turns," Gabriel said. "When I left Ohio, I thought I'd fight the war, then come home and take over my father's carpentry business. Never imagined I'd end up wearing a badge in Wyoming Territory." "Do you regret it?" Katherine asked. "Coming west?" Gabriel considered the question. "No," he said finally. "There's a freedom here that doesn't exist back east, room to breathe, to become whoever you want to be." "Even for a woman alone?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. Gabriel's eyes met hers. "Especially for someone like you. You're stronger than you know, Katherine. You survived being left behind, made it to Wallace, and already have the town council eating out of your hand." A smile tugged at his lips. "Half the single men in town are already finding excuses to walk past the schoolhouse." Katherine laughed, though the thought of other men's interest didn't stir her as much as the way Gabriel said her name. "And what about you, Deputy Vaughn? Do you find excuses to walk past the schoolhouse?" A shadow of vulnerability crossed his face. "I don't need excuses. I've been looking for reasons to see you since the day I brought you to town." The admission hung between them, honest and unadorned. Katherine felt something shift in her chest, a door opening to possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider. After supper, Gabriel walked her back to the boarding house, their pace deliberately slow. The night was clear, stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. "Thank you for tonight," Katherine said as they reached the front porch. "It was lovely." Gabriel stood with his hat in his hands, looking at her in the glow of the porch lantern. "I'd like to see you again. Properly, I mean," Katherine smiled. "I'd like that too." He hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to her cheek. "Good night, Katherine." "Good night, Gabriel." She watched him walk away, a tall figure disappearing into the darkness before turning to enter the boarding house. Martha Cooper was waiting in the sitting room, pretending to knit but clearly bursting with curiosity. "Had a nice evening, did you?" Martha asked innocently. Katherine couldn't hide her smile. "Very nice." Martha's needles clicked as she resumed her knitting. "Deputy Vaughn is a good man. Quiet but respected. Town's been trying to match him up for years, but he's never shown interest. Until now, it seems." Katherine felt her cheeks warm. "We're just friends, Mrs. Cooper." The older woman gave her a knowing look. "For now, perhaps. But I've seen the way he looks at you when you're not watching." Katherine changed the subject, but Martha's words stayed with her as she prepared for bed. The idea that Gabriel might harbor deeper feelings both thrilled and frightened her. She had come west expecting to build a life with her family, not to find herself alone and potentially courted by a deputy sheriff. The school term began the following week, and Katherine found herself fully immersed in her new role. The children of Wallace ranged from shy to boisterous, but all seemed eager to learn. Katherine discovered she had a natural talent for teaching, finding creative ways to engage even the most reluctant students. Gabriel made good on his promise to see her properly. Twice weekly, he would escort her on walks through town or to community gatherings. On Sundays, he sat beside her in church, his presence steady and reassuring. Katherine found herself looking forward to these times together, storing up observations and thoughts to share with him. One Saturday afternoon in early August, Gabriel arrived at the schoolhouse with a picnic basket and a proposal for an outing. "There's a spot by the river about a mile outside town," he explained. "Thought you might enjoy getting away for a few hours." Katherine readily agreed. The summer heat had made the schoolroom stifling, and the prospect of cool water and open air was irresistible. They rode double on Gabriel's horse, Katherine no longer self-conscious about the contact. In fact, she found herself enjoying the solid warmth of his chest against her back, the strength in his arms as he held the reins on either side of her. The spot Gabriel had chosen was indeed beautiful, a bend in the river where the water slowed and deepened, shaded by cottonwood trees. A small meadow dotted with wildflowers stretched from the riverbank. They spread a blanket beneath one of the larger trees, and Gabriel unpacked the picnic cold chicken, corn bread, pickles, and apple pie that Martha Cooper had contributed to their outing. As they ate, Katherine told Gabriel about her student's 8-year-old Tommy Watson, who could barely sit still but had a gift for mathematics, the Miller twins who finished each other's sentences, 13-year-old Sarah Jenkins, whose essay on pioneer women had moved Katherine to tears. "You love it," Gabriel observed, watching her animated expressions. "Teaching," Katherine nodded. "I never thought I would. It was just a means to support myself at first, but now—" She smiled. "Now I can't imagine doing anything else." "You're good for this town," Gabriel said. "Bringing education, refinement. These children will have opportunities their parents never dreamed of because of you." Katherine felt a flush of pleasure at his words. "Wallace is good for me too. I've found purpose here, and—" She hesitated, gathering her courage. "Friendship, connection." Gabriel held her gaze, something unspoken passing between them. "Katherine," he began, his voice lower than usual, "I need to tell you something." A shout from the direction of the road interrupted whatever he had been about to say. A rider approached at a gallop, and Gabriel was on his feet instantly, hand moving to the gun at his hip. The rider, a young ranch hand Katherine recognized from town, reined in his horse sharply. "Deputy Vaughn, thank God I found you. There's trouble at the saloon. Simmons and his boys are tearing the place apart, threatening to shoot anyone who tries to stop them." Gabriel's expression hardened. "I'll be right there." He turned to Katherine. "I'm sorry, I have to go." "Of course," Katherine said, already gathering their things. "I understand. I'll take you back to town first." "No," Katherine interrupted. "They need you now. I can pack up and follow. I know the way." Gabriel hesitated, clearly torn between duty and concern for her safety. "Go," Katherine insisted. "I'll be fine." After another moment's hesitation, Gabriel nodded. "Stay on the main road. I'll send someone to meet you if I can." He mounted behind the ranch hand, casting one last regretful look at Katherine before they galloped away. Katherine packed the remaining food and folded the blanket, her thoughts tumbling over what Gabriel might have been about to say. Something in his expression had made her heart race with anticipation. The walk back to town took longer than expected, the summer sun beating down relentlessly. By the time Katherine reached the outskirts of Wallace, she could hear the commotion from the saloon, raised voices, and the sound of breaking glass. A crowd had gathered outside, mostly women and children watching from a safe distance. Martha Cooper spotted Katherine and hurried to her side. "Thank heavens you're safe," the older woman said. "We were worried when we heard the deputy had left you to ride back." "What's happening?" Katherine asked, looking toward the saloon. Martha's expression darkened. "Simmons' gang rode in about an hour ago. Been causing trouble all across the territory. Started drinking and picking fights, then pulled guns when Mr. Parker tried to calm things down." Katherine felt a chill despite the heat. "Is Gabriel Deputy Vaughn in there now?" Martha nodded grimly. "Went in alone. Sheriff's out at the Reynolds place handling another matter." Katherine's fear must have shown on her face because Martha squeezed her arm reassuringly. "He's handled worse. That man didn't survive the war and 3 years as a lawman by being careless." The words were meant to comfort, but they only heightened Catherine's anxiety. She had just found Gabriel. The thought of losing him was unbearable. A gunshot rang out from inside the saloon, followed by a woman's scream. Catherine's hand flew to her mouth, her heart pounding painfully in her chest. The crowd shifted uneasily, some backing away, others pressing forward to see. Tense minutes passed. Then the saloon doors swung open and Gabriel emerged, a bleeding cut above his eye but otherwise unharmed. Behind him came 3 men, their hands bound, heads bowed in defeat. Several townsmen followed, their expressions a mix of relief and pride in their deputy. Katherine felt her knees weaken with relief. Gabriel handed the prisoners off to 2 men who would guard them until the sheriff returned, then scanned the crowd. When his eyes found Katherine, something in his expression softened. He crossed to her in long strides. "You're hurt," Katherine said, reaching instinctively toward the cut on his forehead. Gabriel caught her hand, his fingers warm around hers. "It's nothing. Are you all right?" "Did you have any trouble on the road?" Katherine shook her head, overwhelmed by the sudden public display of his concern. People were watching, Martha Cooper's knowing smile visible from the corner of her eye. Gabriel seemed to realize it too. He released her hand and stepped back slightly, though his eyes never left hers. "I need to secure the prisoners and write up a report, but could we continue our conversation later? What I was trying to tell you at the river, it's important." "Yes," Katherine said softly. "I'd like that." Gabriel nodded, touched his hat, and turned back to his duties. Katherine watched him go, aware that something fundamental had shifted between them. Whatever he needed to tell her, she suspected it would change everything. Evening found Katherine pacing the small sitting room of her quarters above the schoolhouse, checking the clock every few minutes. Gabriel had sent a note saying he would call on her at 7, once the prisoners were secured in the town's small jail. At precisely 7 o'clock, a knock sounded at her door. Katherine smoothed her skirts, took a deep breath, and opened it to find Gabriel standing there, hat in hand. The cut on his forehead had been cleaned and bandaged, and he had changed into a fresh shirt. "May I come in?" he asked, unusually formal. Katherine stepped aside to let him enter, suddenly nervous. Her quarters were modest, a small sitting room with 2 chairs before a wood stove, a desk where she prepared lessons, a bedroom visible through a partially open door. It was the first time Gabriel had been inside, and she was acutely aware of the intimacy of the setting. Gabriel stood in the center of the room, turning his hat in his hands. "I'm sorry about today. The picnic, I mean." "You were doing your job," Katherine said. "I understand." Gabriel nodded, then set his hat on the small table by the door, a gesture that suggested he intended to stay a while. "Katherine, what I was trying to tell you earlier." He paused, seeming to gather his thoughts. "When I rode out to find you after the wagon train left you behind, I didn't expect you." Katherine's heart quickened. "What do you mean?" Gabriel took a step closer. "I've been alone a long time. After the war, after losing my brother, I came west to escape memories, not to make new ones. Being a deputy suited me, simple, straightforward. I didn't have to get close to anyone." Katherine remained silent, sensing he needed to say this in his own way. "Then I found you on the prairie," Gabriel continued, his voice softening. "So determined to survive, so brave despite everything you'd lost. And these past weeks, watching you build a life here, seeing your strength and kindness." He took another step toward her. "Katherine, I'm falling in love with you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and unadorned. Katherine felt as though her heart might burst from her chest. "I know it's fast," Gabriel said into her silence. "I know you came here looking for a new start, not a husband, but I needed you to know how I feel." Katherine found her voice at last. "When the wagon train left me behind, I thought I had lost everything: my family, my future, my very life. She moved toward him, closing the distance between them. I never imagined that being left behind would lead me to you. Gabriel's eyes searched hers. Is that your way of saying you might feel something too? Instead of answering with words, Katherine reached up and laid her palm against his cheek. Gabriel covered her hand with his own, then slowly, giving her every chance to pull away, leaned down and pressed his lips to hers. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but deepened as Katherine responded. When they finally broke apart, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers, his breathing uneven. "I love you too," Katherine whispered, the words both frightening and freeing. "I think I have since you rode back for me." Gabriel's smile transformed his usually serious face, crinkling the corners of his eyes. He kissed her again, more confidently this time, his arms encircling her waist to draw her closer. A knock at the door startled them apart. Gabriel cleared his throat, stepping back as Katherine smoothed her hair and went to answer it. Martha Cooper stood on the landing, a covered dish in her hands. "I brought some supper, thought you might," she stopped, noticing Gabriel behind Katherine. Her eyebrows rose, but she diplomatically kept any comment to herself. "Well, I see you have company. Perhaps I'll leave this for tomorrow." "Thank you, Mrs. Cooper," Katherine said, her cheeks warm. "That's very kind." After Martha left, Katherine turned back to Gabriel with an embarrassed laugh. "The entire town will know within the hour." Gabriel shrugged, looking untroubled. "Let them talk. I'm not ashamed of how I feel about you." He took her hand. "Katherine, I know this is sudden, but I'm not a man who believes in wasting time once he's sure of something. Would you consider allowing me to court you properly? With the intention of marriage, if you'll have me." Katherine's heart soared at the sincerity in his eyes. "Yes," she said simply. "I would like that very much." The next months passed in a whirl of happiness for Katherine. By day, she taught her growing number of students, finding fulfillment in their progress and enthusiasm. In the evenings and on weekends, she and Gabriel built their relationship, learning the rhythms of each other's lives and hearts. Their courtship became the talk of Wallace, with most residents expressing approval and even delight at the match. A few older women clucked about the speed of their attachment, but even they softened when they saw the way Gabriel looked at Katherine, or how she brightened whenever he entered a room. As autumn painted the landscape in golds and reds, Gabriel began building a house on a plot of land at the edge of town close enough for Katherine to walk to the school, but with enough space for a garden and perhaps, someday, children. Katherine would visit in the evenings, watching as the structure took shape under Gabriel's skilled hands. "I didn't know you were a carpenter," she remarked one evening as she brought him supper at the construction site. Gabriel ran a hand over a newly placed beam. "My father taught me. Said every man should know how to build something that lasts." He smiled at her. "Guess I'm finally putting those lessons to use." By November, the house was nearly complete, a modest but sturdy two-bedroom home with a large kitchen and a covered porch. Gabriel had included special touches that made Katherine's heart swell. Built-in bookshelves for her growing collection, large windows to let in the light she loved, a small study where she could prepare her lessons. As the first snow dusted Wallace, Gabriel proposed properly, on one knee in the completed house that would soon be their home, offering a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "Katherine Vance," he said, his deep voice uncharacteristically unsteady. "Would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Katherine's "yes" was immediate and heartfelt, tears of joy spilling down her cheeks as Gabriel slipped the ring onto her finger. That night, they announced their engagement at a small gathering at Martha Cooper's boarding house, receiving congratulations and well wishes from their friends in town. They set the wedding date for Christmas Eve, agreeing there was no reason to wait when both were so certain. Martha and several other women of the town threw themselves into preparations, determined that Wallace's schoolteacher and deputy would have a celebration to remember. The night before the wedding, Katherine sat by the window in her room above the schoolhouse, watching snowflakes drift lazily past the glass. Tomorrow, she would become Katherine Vaughn, wife to a man she had known less than 6 months but loved with her whole heart. If someone had told her on that terrible day when the wagon train disappeared over the horizon that her abandonment would lead to such happiness, she would never have believed it. Yet here she was, on the cusp of a new life built from the ashes of her old one. A soft knock at her door roused her from her reflections. She opened it to find Gabriel standing there, snowflakes melting in his dark hair. "It's bad luck to see the bride before the wedding," Katherine teased, though she made no move to close the door. Gabriel's smile was tender. "I'll risk it. I wanted to give you something." He held out a small package wrapped in brown paper. Katherine unwrapped it carefully to reveal a journal bound in soft leather, nearly identical to the one her father had kept. Her eyes filled with tears as she ran her fingers over the cover. "I noticed yours was nearly full," Gabriel explained. "Thought you might like a new one to start our life together." Katherine rose on her toes to kiss him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. When they broke apart, Gabriel brushed a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "Tomorrow," he whispered like a promise. "Tomorrow," she echoed. The wedding was simple but beautiful. The church was decorated with evergreen boughs and candles, the scent of pine filling the air. Katherine wore a dress of ivory silk that Martha and the other women had helped her make, with her mother's lace veil as her something old. As she walked down the aisle on Mayor Hanson's arm, standing in for her father, Katherine's eyes remained fixed on Gabriel, waiting for her at the altar. He looked so handsome in his new suit, his green eyes shining with love and pride as she approached. The minister's words washed over her in a blur of emotion, but when it came time to speak her vows, Katherine's voice was clear and certain. Gabriel's hands were steady as he placed the ring on her finger, his "I do" resonating through the small church. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Gabriel's kiss was tender and reverent, a promise of all the days to come. The congregation's applause seemed distant to Katherine's ears, overwhelmed as she was by the magnitude of the moment. The celebration afterward at the hotel was joyous and warm, with music from local fiddle players, dancing, and a feast prepared by the women of the town. Katherine found herself passed from one well-wisher to another, her cheeks aching from smiling, her heart full to bursting. As the evening drew to a close, Gabriel found her amidst the crowd, extending his hand. "Ready to go home, Mrs. Vaughn." The sound of her new name sent a thrill through Katherine. She placed her hand in his. "Yes, Mr. Vaughn, I believe I am." They said their goodbyes amid cheers and knowing smiles, then stepped out into the snowy night. Gabriel had prepared a sleigh to take them to their new home, complete with warm blankets and hot bricks for their feet. As they glided through the silent, snow-covered streets, Katherine leaned against her husband's shoulder. "I still can't believe this is real," she confessed. "That I found you, that we're here." Gabriel's arm tightened around her. "Believe it," he murmured, pressing a kiss to her temple. "This is just the beginning." Their home was warm and welcoming, the fire in the hearth casting a golden glow over the rooms that Gabriel had prepared for their return. Katherine stood in the center of what was now their sitting room, taking it all in the furniture Gabriel had crafted, the quilts made by the women of Wallace, the bookshelves already filled with her books and teaching materials. Gabriel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "Welcome home," he whispered against her ear. Katherine turned in his embrace, raising her face to his. "I love you, Gabriel Vaughn." His eyes darkened as he bent to kiss her. "And I love you, Katherine Vaughn, more than I have words to say." That night, they discovered a new language between them, one of touch and whispered endearments, of vulnerability and trust. Katherine gave herself to her husband completely, finding in his arms a passion and tenderness that surpassed anything she could have imagined. As they lay together afterward, Katherine's head on Gabriel's chest, his heartbeat strong beneath her ear, she marveled at the journey that had brought her here. From abandoned and alone on the prairie to beloved wife in the arms of a good man, it seemed almost too miraculous to be true. "What are you thinking about?" Gabriel asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. Katherine smiled in the darkness. "How fortunate I am that the wagon train left me behind." Gabriel propped himself up on one elbow, looking down at her with an expression of such love it made her breath catch. "No," he said softly. "How fortunate I am that I rode back for you." Spring came to Wallace in a riot of wildflowers and new green grass. The town had grown over the winter, with new buildings rising along Main Street and more families arriving by wagon and stagecoach. The railroad construction had begun just east of town, promising prosperity and growth in the coming years. Katherine's school now boasted 35 students, requiring her to enlist the help of 17-year-old Rebecca Turner as an assistant teacher. Gabriel had been promoted to sheriff when the previous one retired to a ranch outside town, a position that came with more responsibility, but also more respect. Their home had become a gathering place for friends and community events, with Katherine's warm hospitality and Gabriel's quiet strength drawing people to them. They had settled into married life with an ease that surprised even them, their different temperaments complementing rather than clashing. On a warm May evening, Katherine sat on their porch swing, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. Gabriel joined her, handing her a cup of tea before settling beside her with a contented sigh. "Long day?" Katherine asked, noticing the tired lines around his eyes. Gabriel nodded. "Railroad crews got into it with some local boys at the saloon. Nothing serious, just high spirits and too much whiskey." He took a sip of his own tea. "How was your day?" Katherine hesitated, her heart fluttering with anticipation. She had been waiting for the right moment to share her news, and this peaceful evening seemed perfect. "My day was illuminating," she said carefully. "I visited Dr. Mitchell this afternoon." Gabriel turned to her, instantly alert. "Are you ill? Why didn't you tell me you weren't feeling well?" Katherine placed a hand on his arm, smiling at his concern. "I'm not ill, Gabriel. She took a deep breath. "I'm going to have a baby. In November." For a moment, Gabriel stared at her, his expression frozen in shock. Then a smile spread across his face, so radiant it transformed him. "A baby," he repeated, his voice filled with wonder. "We're going to have a baby." Katherine nodded, tears of happiness pricking her eyes. "Are you pleased?" In answer, Gabriel gathered her into his arms, being careful not to spill her tea. "Pleased doesn't begin to describe it," he murmured into her hair. "Katherine, you've given me more joy than I ever thought possible, and now this." He pulled back to look at her, his eyes suspiciously bright. "Thank you." Katherine laughed through her tears. "I think you had something to do with it, too." Gabriel grinned, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "Our child," he said softly, "a little piece of both of us." That night, as they lay in bed discussing names and plans, Katherine marveled again at the unexpected turn her life had taken. When the wagon train had left her behind, she had thought it was the end of her story. Instead, It had been just the beginning. The summer and fall passed in a whirl of preparation. Gabriel added a nursery to their home, painting the walls a sunny yellow that made Katherine smile every time she saw it. Martha Cooper organized a quilting circle to create beautiful blankets for the baby, while other women in town contributed handmade clothing and toys. Katherine continued teaching until mid-October, when Dr. Mitchell insisted she rest at home for the final weeks of her pregnancy. Her students presented her with a book of their stories and drawings for the baby to read when it gets bigger, reducing Katherine to tears of gratitude. At home, Katherine prepared for motherhood by reading every book she could find on the subject and writing long letters to her cousin in Philadelphia, who had 5 children of her own, and offered practical advice mixed with humorous warnings about the realities of new parenthood. Gabriel became increasingly protective, checking on her throughout the day and enlisting neighbors to stay with her when his duties took him out of town. Katherine found his concern endearing, if occasionally stifling, knowing it came from a place of deep love. On a cold, clear night in late November, Katherine woke to the first pains of labor. She nudged Gabriel awake, trying to keep her voice calm despite her racing heart. "It's time," she said simply. Gabriel was instantly alert, helping her through the first contractions while sending a local boy to fetch both Dr. Mitchell and Martha Cooper. By the time they arrived, Katherine's pains were coming regularly, her breathing labored as she paced the bedroom. "You're doing wonderfully, Doctor," Mitchell assured her after his examination. "This baby isn't in any hurry, but everything looks normal." Martha shooed Gabriel from the room despite his protests. "Go pace the porch like every other expectant father," she told him firmly. "We'll call you when there's news." The labor lasted through the night and into the following day, Katherine's strength and determination impressing even the experienced Martha. As the sun began to set on the second day, Dr. Mitchell announced that the time had come to push. Gabriel had refused to leave the house, staying just outside the bedroom door where he could hear Katherine's cries and the encouraging words of the doctor and Martha. When he finally heard the thin, outraged wail of a newborn, he nearly collapsed with relief. Martha opened the door, her lined face beaming. "Sheriff Vaughn," she said formally, "would you like to meet your son?" Gabriel entered the room on unsteady legs. Katherine lay propped against pillows, her face pale and exhausted but radiant with joy. In her arms was a small bundle wrapped in one of Martha's quilts. "Gabriel," Katherine said, her voice hoarse from her efforts, "come meet James Gabriel Vaughn." Gabriel sat carefully on the edge of the bed, overcome with emotion as Katherine placed their son in his arms. The baby was red-faced and wrinkled, with a shock of dark hair and what Gabriel would swear were Katherine's delicate features. "Hello, James," Gabriel whispered, one finger gently stroking the baby's soft cheek. "I'm your father." Katherine watched them, her heart so full it felt as though it might overflow. "He's perfect," she said softly. Gabriel looked up at her, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "You're perfect," he corrected, leaning forward to kiss her forehead. "I love you so much, Katherine, both of you." Young James quickly became the center of their world. Katherine discovered the challenges and joys of motherhood, finding a new rhythm to her days that revolved around feedings, naps, and the miraculous moments of watching her son discover the world around him. Gabriel proved to be a devoted father, happily taking his turn walking the floor with a colicky baby or changing soiled diapers. The sight of the tall, serious sheriff cradling his tiny son and singing lullabies became a familiar one in Wallace, softening his image in the eyes of the townsfolk. By the following autumn, when James was taking his first tentative steps and babbling his first recognizable words, Katherine returned to teaching part-time, bringing her son with her to school. The older students adored Little Sheriff, as they called him, taking turns entertaining him while Katherine taught. Life settled into a new pattern, busy, occasionally chaotic, but filled with love and purpose. Katherine and Gabriel's relationship deepened with the shared experience of parenthood, their partnership strengthening as they navigated the challenges together. On the night of their second wedding anniversary, Gabriel surprised Katherine with a special dinner at home after James was asleep. He had enlisted Martha's help to prepare her favorite foods and had even managed to procure a bottle of wine from the hotel's limited stock. "What's all this for?" Katherine asked, touched by his efforts. Gabriel smiled, pulling out her chair. "Can a man celebrate 2 years of happiness with his wife?" As they ate by candlelight, they reminisced about their first meeting, their courtship, and the birth of their son. Katherine marveled at how much had happened in such a relatively short time. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if the wagon train hadn't left you behind?" Gabriel asked, refilling her wine glass. "If you had made it to Oregon as planned," Katherine considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted, "I would have helped my father establish his practice. Perhaps I would have eventually married some respectable doctor or businessman." She reached across the table to take his hand. "But I wouldn't have found you or had James. I wouldn't trade this life for any other, Gabriel. Not for all the comforts of Philadelphia or the opportunities of Oregon." Gabriel squeezed her hand, his expression serious. "When I found you on the prairie that day, I was just doing my job. I never imagined I was finding my future, my happiness." He paused, then added softly, "You saved me, Katherine. I was just existing before you. Going through the motions, living with ghosts." Katherine felt tears prick her eyes at the raw emotion in his voice. "We saved each other," she corrected gently. Later, as they lay in each other's arms, the house quiet around them, Katherine thought about the long, unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. The loss of her parents and brother had seemed an insurmountable tragedy at the time. Being abandoned by the wagon train had felt like the final cruel blow of fate. Yet without those painful events, she would never have found her way to Wallace, to Gabriel, to the life that now filled her with such joy and purpose. Sometimes, Katherine reflected, what appeared to be abandonment was actually the first step on a path to where one truly belonged. 3 years later, Katherine stood on the platform of the newly completed Wallace train station, James's hand firmly in hers, her daughter Elizabeth nestled in her arms. The morning air was crisp with the promise of autumn, the station crowded with townspeople eager to witness the arrival of the first passenger train. "Will Papa be on the train?" James asked, bouncing with excitement. At 4, he was the image of his father, with the same serious green eyes and thoughtful expression. Katherine smiled down at him. "No, sweetheart. Papa's already at the station in Cheyenne. He'll be on tomorrow's train." Gabriel had traveled to the territorial capital for a law enforcement conference, his first significant time away from home since Elizabeth's birth, 6 months earlier. The distant whistle of the approaching train sent a ripple of excitement through the crowd. James tugged at Katherine's skirts, his eyes wide with wonder as the locomotive came into view, steam billowing around it. "Look, Mama, it's so big," Katherine shared his awe. The train represented progress, connection, the shrinking of the vast distances that had once made places like Wallace feel so isolated. The journey that had taken her weeks by wagon train could now be completed in days by rail. As the train pulled into the station with a screech of brakes and a final blast of its whistle, Katherine thought of how much Wallace had changed in the 5 years since her arrival. The small collection of buildings had grown into a proper town, with a bank, a hotel, several stores, and even a small opera house under construction. Her one-room schoolhouse had expanded to 3 rooms with 3 full-time teachers, including Katherine herself. Gabriel now had 2 deputies working under him, necessary for the growing population and increased traffic through town. Their own family had grown too. James with his curious mind and gentle spirit, Elizabeth with her mother's dark hair and already determined personality. Their home had been expanded twice to accommodate their growing family and frequent guests. As the passengers began disembarking from the train, Katherine spotted a familiar face, Martha Cooper, returning from a rare visit to her sister in Denver. The older woman had become like family to the Vaughns, an honorary grandmother to their children and a dear friend to Katherine. "Mrs. Cooper," James called, waving enthusiastically. Martha made her way through the crowd, her face lighting up at the sight of them. "My goodness, look how you've grown in just 2 weeks," she exclaimed, bending to hug James. "And Miss Elizabeth, too." She tickled the baby's chin, eliciting a gurgle of delight. "How was your trip?" Katherine asked as they walked away from the platform, James skipping ahead. "Enlightening," Martha replied with a twinkle in her eye. "My sister's neighborhood has electricity now, can you imagine? Lights that come on with the flip of a switch," Katherine laughed. "Gabriel says we'll have electricity in Wallace within 5 years. I'll believe it when I see it." They strolled back toward town, Martha regaling Katherine with tales of Denver's growth and modernity. As they passed the spot where Main Street met the road to the station, Katherine paused, a memory surfacing unexpectedly. "This is where I first saw Wallace," she said softly, more to herself than to Martha. "When Gabriel brought me in after finding me on the prairie." Martha followed her gaze. "I remember that day well. You looked half dead from exhaustion, but there was still fire in your eyes." She patted Katherine's arm. "I knew right then you'd be good for our deputy and for our town." Katherine smiled, adjusting Elizabeth in her arms. "Wallace has been good to me too, better than I could have ever imagined." That evening, after the children were asleep, Katherine sat at her desk, writing in her journal the leather-bound one Gabriel had given her on the eve of their wedding, now nearly full. She had maintained the habit of daily writing that her father had instilled in her, finding it a way to process her thoughts and preserve memories for her children. As she wrote about the train's arrival and her reflections on the changes in Wallace, Katherine found herself remembering the desperate young woman she had been, abandoned and alone on the prairie. How far she had come from that moment of despair to this life of fulfillment and purpose. A knock at the front door interrupted her thoughts. Puzzled it was well past the hour for social calls, Katherine set down her pen and went to answer it. When she opened the door, her heart leapt. Gabriel stood on the porch, travel-worn but smiling, his saddlebags slung over his shoulder. "Gabriel," she exclaimed, throwing her arms around him. "You weren't supposed to be home until tomorrow." He hugged her tightly, his face buried in her hair. "Couldn't wait that long," he murmured. "Borrowed a horse in Cheyenne and rode straight through." Pulling back, he studied her face as if memorizing it anew. "I missed you, all of you." Katherine drew him inside, taking his coat and hat. "The children will be so excited to see you in the morning. James has been counting the days." Gabriel set down his saddlebags and pulled Katherine into his arms again. "And you, Mrs. Vaughn, did you miss your husband?" Katherine smiled up at him, her heart full of the love that had only deepened over their years together. "Every moment," she assured him, rising on her toes to kiss him. Later, as they lay in bed talking quietly so as not to wake the children in the adjoining rooms, Gabriel told her about his time in Cheyenne, the meetings with other lawmen, the new techniques they had discussed, the changing face of law enforcement in the territory. "They offered me a position," he said finally. With the territorial marshal's office, better pay, more authority. Katherine propped herself up on one elbow, studying his face in the moonlight that filtered through the curtains. "Are you considering it?" Gabriel shook his head. "It would mean moving to Cheyenne, leaving Wallace." His hand found hers in the darkness. "Leaving the home we've built together." Relief washed through Katherine. Though she would have supported Gabriel if he truly wanted the position, the thought of leaving Wallace, the town that had embraced her, the community they had helped build, the place where their children were born, was painful. "Are you sure?" she asked. "It sounds like an honor to be asked." Gabriel's smile was visible even in the dim light. "I'm sure. My place is here with you, with our children, with this town." He squeezed her hand. "I rode back for you once, Katherine. I'm not about to ride away now." The next morning brought the chaos and joy of a family reunited. James launched himself at his father the moment he realized Gabriel was home, chattering excitedly about the train and everything else that had happened in his absence. Elizabeth, recognizing her father despite his week away, reached for him with chubby arms and delighted coos. As Katherine prepared breakfast, she watched Gabriel with their children, the gentle way he listened to James's stories, the tender care with which he held Elizabeth. The love that filled their home was palpable, wrapping around them like a warm blanket against the outside world. "Papa," James said as they ate, syrup from his pancakes threatening to drip onto his shirt, "Miss Turner told us a story about a girl who got left behind by her family and had to find her way home all alone." Katherine and Gabriel exchanged glances, a silent communication born of years together. "Did she now?" Gabriel replied, wiping Elizabeth's chin. "And what happened to this girl?" James shrugged. "She walked and walked, and then a nice man found her and helped her. But Miss Turner said it was just a story and that we should always stay with our group on outings." He looked thoughtfully at his mother. "But Mama got left behind for real, didn't she?" "By the wagon train," Katherine nodded, surprised that her son had made the connection. They had told him simplified versions of how they met, but hadn't emphasized the abandonment aspect of the story. "I did," she said. "It was very frightening." James considered this. "But then Papa found you and brought you to Wallace, right? And that's why we're a family." The simple wisdom of a child, Katherine thought, smiling at her son. "That's exactly right, James. Sometimes the hardest journeys lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Gabriel reached across the table to take her hand, his eyes full of the same wonder Katherine felt, everyday wonder at the life they had created together, at the love that had grown from such unlikely beginnings. "And sometimes," Gabriel added, his voice warm with emotion, "riding back is the best decision a person can make." As summer turned to autumn, then winter, and finally bloomed into spring again, the rhythm of life in Wallace continued its steady pace. The railroad brought new people and opportunities. The town expanded with each passing month, and the Vaughn family remained at the heart of the community. Katherine's school flourished under her direction, gaining recognition throughout the territory for its progressive teaching methods. Gabriel's fair but firm approach to law enforcement helped Wallace avoid many of the troubles that plagued other growing railroad towns. On a warm June day, 10 years to the month since Katherine had been left behind by the wagon train, she stood in the doorway of their home watching her children play in the yard. James, now 9, was teaching 6-year-old Elizabeth and 3-year-old Thomas how to fly the kite he had made himself. Gabriel came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist as they both observed the scene. "Happy," he murmured against her ear. Katherine leaned back against his chest, covering his hands with her own. "Completely," she replied. As she watched her children laughing in the sunshine, Katherine thought about the long, strange journey that had led her here, the losses and abandonments. the unexpected rescue, the love that had grown in the most unlikely of circumstances. Being left behind had once seemed like the worst thing that could happen to her. Now she knew it had been the beginning of everything that mattered.